We've been going through a sermon series through the book of James called Rooted. And if you were to take a look at chapter 5, which is where we're going to be today, chapter 5, verse 1, if you were to take chapter 5 and start reading from chapter 5, it would almost seem out of place. It really would. You see, the problem is that he talks about this in chapter 5. He talks about the misuse of riches is what he does. But the problem is that you see the letters of the New Testament, Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, James, are intended to be read as letters, not chapters and verses. It doesn't make sense if you just start at chapter 5 and start reading, because it's out of context. It just doesn't make sense. It's all completely miscombobbled because you've missed the first part of what James has been talking about. This is why I preach through books of the Bible instead of standalone topical sermons, because I used to actually do that, and I can't. I've done it a few times since then. It just feels awkward because I'm not going through a book of the Bible, and you have to do so much explanation of what's been going on before to get to where you are and where it ends up afterwards. It's because it just doesn't make sense to start in the middle of the thing and take it out of context. That's why I talk about all the time, we can't just cherry pick scriptures out of context, because they don't make sense. They just don't make sense. See, what I do when I go to start the sermon, when I'm going through a book, is I start where I left off last week. And as I was studying this week, I tried to do just that. Pick up at chapter 5 and just start going from there. And I didn't take a look at anything until Friday afternoon, because I had cooked on Thursday and Friday. I had read the scripture a few different times during the week, and I'd been contemplating it. Had a few ideas rolling in my head. But when I got into the office on Friday afternoon to actually study and write the thing, I was having a really hard time because I was starting in chapter 5. And then God's like, you need to go back to chapter 4. What happened just before this? And that's where I read the last part of 4, and I'm like, oh yeah, it makes sense now. That's typically what I do. But for some reason this week, I didn't do that. And God reminded me that I needed to go back to where I was last week and start from there, because it just flows together better. Okay? All of that to say this, that last week, we talked about pride and arrogance. We talked about boasting and going after money, how people make plans and have no consideration for God whatsoever. And that we need to have, in verse 15 of chapter 4, we need to have this godly perspective on things. Why? Because it's nothing more than our own vain attempts to seize control of something that was never ours to control in the first place. If the Lord wills is not just a phrase to put into our vocabulary and memorize. It is an attitude to behold. If you would join me, we're going to be in James chapter 5, continuing this series through James. We're going to be in James, just 6 verses. It's going to be James 5, 1-6. Says, come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries, which are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments have become moth-eaten. Your gold and your silver have rusted, and their rust will be a witness against you and will consume your flesh like fire. It is in the last days that you have stored up your treasure. Behold, the pay of the laborers who mowed your fields, and which has been withheld by you, cries out against you. And the outcry of those who did the harvesting has reached the ears of the Lord of the Sabaoth. You have lived luxuriously on the earth and led a life of wanton pleasure. You have fattened your hearts in the day of slaughter. You have condemned and put to death the righteous man. He does not resist you. So we start off here in chapter 5. Okay, and he says, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries which are coming upon you." Why? Because if we just pick up in verse 5, chapter 5, verse 1, and you read, come now, you rich, weep and howl for your miseries which are coming upon you," that doesn't make sense. Why? Why do the rich need to weep and howl for their miseries which are coming upon them? Why? Why in the world would they do that? They're rich, don't they have everything? No, not necessarily. It says, "Your riches have become rotted and your garments have become moth-eaten." Okay. Basically, what's being said here doesn't make sense unless you go straight back to what we were just talking about in chapter 4. It says in chapter 4, verse 13, let's see if we can put this together and see if it can make sense. It says, "Come now, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city and spend a year there and engage in business and make a profit. Yet you do not know what your life will be like tomorrow. You are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and also do this or that. But as it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Therefore, to one who knows the right thing to do and does not do it, to him it is sin. Come now, you rich. Weep and howl for your miseries which are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted and your garments have become moth-eaten." Is the picture becoming clearer? It makes sense only when you put the two of them together. Because it doesn't make sense. Basically, what James is saying is that what you've spent your time pursuing is wasting away. Y'all have made plans without even a consideration for God. You've gone off on your own, trying to stab your own control over situations that's not yours to control in the first place, because everything belongs to God in the first place, and He has the ultimate control over everything anyway. So our vain attempts at pursuing money and pursuing that bottom dollar, that go-getter type attitude that we talked about last week, he's talking against that kind of attitude. What you've spent your time pursuing is wasting away. So therefore you need to weep and wail, because everything you've worked your whole life for is all for nothing. Verse 3 goes on, and he says, "Your gold and your silver have rusted, and the rust will be a witness against you and will consume your flesh like fire. It is in the last days that you have stored up your treasure." You see, your riches rot and they witness against you. You see, what we're talking about here is an attitude of greed. Last week we talked about the idea of control, and we need to be humble before the Lord. Okay, we need to think of ourselves properly in the right place. That we are not all that in a bag of chips. That we are, in the sight of God, pitiful, poor, blind, and naked. But yet, there's a difference between being humble before the Lord and being confident in His gifts and your purpose and where He's got you. Something that our mentor, Grant G, always says: God puts all the right people in all the right places at the right time for the right purpose. And that is the God's honest truth. He puts all the right people in the right place at the right time for the right purpose. Everybody, you are where you are for a reason. Okay? You are where you are for a reason. Okay? Now today we're talking about the idea of riches and this we're continuing on this theme of not being humble before the Lord. And now instead of talking about control and pride and arrogance, we're talking about greed. Because what we spend our life pursuing this stuff, piece of paper called money, it is just stuff. It is a piece of paper that the government has said is worth something. I bet if I stuck this in the fire, that it'd go up in flames, and then it'd be worth nothing, right? He talks about gold and silver. Gold and silver don't necessarily rust, but they do corrode, and they become tarnished, and you have to clean them up again, or melt them down and put them through the refiner's fire. Yeah. You see, we're talking about greed. Your greed, one way or another, will consume you. Your greed, one way or another, if you are a greedy person, it will consume you one way or another. Whether it consumes you in this life, or you're extremely prosperous in this life, and it'll get you in the next. Yeah. You see, it's the last days, he says, that we've stored up treasure. Even 2,000 years later, we are in the last days. When James wrote this, they were in the last days. Okay? When he wrote this, they were in the last days. We are still in the last days 2,000 years later. Why? Because ever since Christ was raised up to heaven, we've been in the last days, and we are waiting for him to return again. And until he returns again, we are in the last days. Okay? We've stored up treasure and we haven't considered God in anything we do. Verse 4, he continues on. He says, behold the pay of the laborers who mowed your fields, and which has been withheld by you cries out against you. And the outcry of those who did the harvesting has reached the ears of the Lord of the Sabaoth. Okay, that word Sabaoth, I gotta find it here. It means the Lord of hosts. Okay, that's what that word means. But what they've done basically is they've withheld the workers' wages, and the workers have cried out, and God has heard their cry. Okay? In the Old Testament, there are laws about such behavior. The first one occurs in Leviticus 19:13. And it says, you shall not oppress the neighbor or rob him. The wages of a hired man are not to remain with you all night until morning. You shall not curse. Just 13. I'm sorry. You shall, the wages of a hired man shall not remain with you all night until the morning. Basically, you're supposed to, in the law, you pay your workers at the end of the day. Typically, that's when workers got paid, was at the end of the day. Now, in our country, you either get paid weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly. Okay? So basically what it's saying is when it comes time for payday, you pay them. You don't withhold their wages. Okay? Deuteronomy 24:15. You shall give him his wages on his day before the sun sets, for he is poor and sets his heart on it, so that he will not cry against you to the Lord and it become a sin to you. Wow. I think that's just where James is pulling that one from. Okay. It also talks about oppressing the poor. We go to Proverbs 3:27 and 28. Do not withhold good from those whom it is due when it is in your power to do it. Do not say to your neighbor, go and come back, and tomorrow I will give it, when you have it with you. Okay. We move to Amos. There's Amos. Oh, no, that's Malachi. hold on, Malachi. Amos 8, 4-6, it says, "Hear this, you who trample the needy, to do away with the humble of the land, saying, when will the new moon be over, so that we may sell grain in the Sabbath, that we may open the wheat market, to make the bushel smaller and the shekel bigger, and to cheat with dishonest scales, so as to buy the helpless for money, and the needy for a pair of sandals, and that we may sell the refuse of the wheat." And finally, Malachi 3:5 says, "Then I will draw near to you for judgment, and I will be a swift witness against the sorcerers and against the adulterers and against those who swear falsely and against those who oppress the wage earner in his wages, the widow and the orphan, and those who turn aside, and the alien, and do not fear me, says the Lord of hosts." So basically what we're getting at here is ill-gotten gains. Don't pursue ill-gotten gains. Withholding wages, oppressing the poor, these are not attitudes consistent with the life of Jesus Christ. Okay? Verse 5 goes on and he says, "You have lived luxuriously on the earth and led a life of wanton pleasure. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter." You see, all of this is going straight back to the first part of chapter 4, when we talked about living luxuriously and living in self-indulgence, or in that fancy nickel preacher word, hedonism. Self-indulgence. If we're going to live and we're going to pursue greedily and we're going to rob the poor and we're going to withhold wages and we're going to do things of a greed type of nature, we're doing nothing more than being hedonistic. We are pursuing our own self-indulgence. We're fattening ourselves up for the day of slaughter. Verse 6 says, "You have condemned and put to death the righteous man. He does not resist you." Yeah. I hate to say it, but as I was thinking through my sermon this morning, I had a whole bunch of people running through my head. There are a lot of people out there who are selling a gospel that is not the gospel. Guys like Joel Osteen, Kenneth Copeland, Creflo Dollar, Oral Roberts, Kenneth Hagin, Jim Bakker, Robert Tilton, Benny Hinn, Paula White, Pat Robertson, just to name a few. They peddle the gospel. They oppress the poor. If you give $1,000 toward my $51 million jet, the Lord will bless you. That is nothing but a load of bull. Because that is nothing more than robbing from the poor. They are fattening themselves for the slaughter. You know what the sad part is? Is that there's a good teacher running around with the likes of some of these people. A guy by the name of Francis Chan has been known to be hanging around and at the same conferences as these people. I haven't decided whether or not he's joining them or subtly getting in there amongst them and trying to preach the true gospel. I haven't decided yet. But here's the thing. Beware. Beware of the books that you read. Beware of the sermons you listen to. Beware of all of these things, because they're a publisher's after one thing, right? A publisher's after to sell books, right? That's what they need to do. That's what they want to do. It's to make money. It's to make money. And when I first wrote my book, I considered trying to get a publisher to take it. But then for some reason, I didn't really understand why. I discovered self-publishing, and I didn't pursue any of the publishers. And I went on my own and did my own thing because some of the publishers are looking for certain material. They have lists of material that they want. They can publish or unpublish at any time they want. And if I publish myself, I can have control over the over what I put out instead of letting them have the complete control. Basically, what a publisher does is they buy your material, essentially. They pay you for your material and do with it whatever they want. You see, greed here in verse 6 does not stay greed. You see, greed turns into murder. That's what happened to the Pharisees. You see, they were greedy. And somebody was stealing their thunder. A guy by the name of Jesus Christ, the Nazarene. Stealing their thunder. Stealing their power. And greed turned into murder. Apparently, the same thing has been going on here as James is addressing this with his readers. There's two possibilities. Either the people he's writing to are doing this, or they are the victims of said behavior. Okay? There are two outlooks on it. Not sure 100% either way which one it is. But nonetheless, they have used the judicial system. They have condemned and put to death the righteous man. And the righteous man at this point, he hasn't done anything about it. He just rolls over and obeys them. Okay? I said this before in a previous sermon, but it needs to be said again because greed didn't stay with greed here. Greed turned into murder. Sin does not just stay sin. Sin begets more sin. Because when you tell one lie, you have to tell another lie to cover up the previous lie, and then you have to tell another lie to cover up the previous lie. And it's a snowball effect that just keeps rolling downhill, and before too long, you're not sure what you've told anybody, and sooner or later, your lies are going to catch up with you. Have you ever noticed that money doesn't satisfy? Do you ever notice that one sin doesn't necessarily satisfy, so you pursue it down a path further? Sherry and I was thinking Friday night as I was putting this all together, and God brought to my mind the idea of where Sherry and I came from. I was in culinary school in Chicago, lived downtown Chicago. We lived in an efficiency apartment, one-room efficiency apartment. It had a bathroom, a kitchen, and the living room, dining room, and bedroom were all one room. Rented that room for $800 a month on the 8th floor of a high-rise building. We had nothing. I was working full-time for, $9, $10 an hour? I think it was 10. Making $10 an hour working up north at Northwestern University, and Sherry didn't work. I was full-time school and full-time work, and we had nothing. We had no furniture. We slept on the floor. We didn't even buy a bed. The first thing we bought a kitchen table because I wanted somewhere to sit down other than the bed. We bought a kitchen table. And then about a month later, we finally bought a futon bed and got ourselves up off the floor. And God blessed. But Sherry and I go back to that and we look at ourselves, and God has blessed us more so than what we can ever possibly fathom, to look at where we were and where we've come from now. But times were simpler then. We didn't have anything, but things were so much simpler. Life was simple. I was in school, I went to work, we came home, we had nothing, so we enjoyed each other's company. There was only one thing that was missing during that time in our life, and that was God. That was the only thing that was missing, is that we hadn't focused ourselves with God in the middle yet. That came a few years down the road after she hounded me. You see, God blesses us. But sometimes we get caught up so much so in the pursuits of this world and in career and money and retirement that we lose sight of the simpler times. We let go. We don't keep a hold of the simple nature of what life brings. You see, greed creates chaos. Generosity brings hope. Have you ever been, we've all been generous, but have you ever been generous to somebody and watched the hope that it brings them? Yeah. It's because we don't preach the gospel necessarily by speaking words. It's by what we do. Sometimes preaching the gospel doesn't require a word at all. 40 plus times in the Bible, the word generous, share, or greed is talked about. I put a few notes few of them in your bulletins for notes. We're not going to have time to go through them all. Okay, but I encourage you to go through them and read through them. Okay. 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy 6:18. Instruct them to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous and ready to share, storing up for themselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future, so that they may take hold of that which is life indeed. We go to Acts 2:45. And they began selling their property and possessions and were sharing them with all, as anyone might have need. Skip forward to Ephesians 5:3. But immorality or any impurity or greed must not even be named among you, as is proper for saints. And finally, Philippians 2:17 and 18. But even if I am being poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrifice and service of your faith, I rejoice and share my joy with you all. You too, I urge you, rejoice in the same way and share your joy with me. One of the best examples that I can ever give is the example of what happened in this building yesterday. You want to talk about generosity overflowing? That is what life should be like all the time. We were in there, and there weren't just members of our church present helping. There were members of several different congregations in there helping, donating food, moving chairs and tables. We came together to help a family grieve in the time of loss. That is the best example of generosity that I can ever come out with. Because I'm telling you, I said it at the very beginning, we've been in churches where they've run out of food and there just wasn't. That's unfathomable to me. I mean, I was raised, but my grandmother would have a stroke if a funeral dinner ran out of food. That's a cardinal sin. You do not run out of food. You know? But what happened yesterday is generosity beyond generosity. Because let me tell you what, these bouquets of flowers are not cheap. And this room was filled with them. It takes time, whether you bought a pie, bought a cake or a dessert, or you made the thing from scratch. It takes time, money, effort, in order to do that. Don't think that it's nothing, because it's things like that, that what we believe are the small things in life are the things that really, really matter. That's what matters in life. And if we get caught up in this gospel of these, just a few of the examples of the guys that I've named earlier, if we get caught up in the prosperity gospel and the greed and the worldly way of doing things, if we truly wrap ourselves up in this, we're gonna fall. Our greed is gonna get a hold of us, whether we pay for it in this life or the next. Thank God for his grace and mercy. Because, I can't say that I have never been greedy, because I have. I've been there, I've done it. You see, the big idea for today is that we need to be rooted in generosity instead of being greedy and pursuing dishonest gains. That's what this is all about. We need to be rooted in generosity instead of being greedy and pursuing dishonest gains. You see, generosity is what characterizes a Christian life. If I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. It isn't about what we do. What we do isn't going to save us. But what we do is a result of who we are. And if who we are is rotten, that fruit that comes out is going to be rotten too. It's going to be greed that comes out instead of generosity. It's going to be, striving at control instead of, pride and arrogance instead of humility. It's going to be lashing out with our tongue instead of using words to build up. It's going to be playing favorites instead of treating everybody equally and with the same love and care and compassion, mercy and acceptance that we give ourselves and other people. Where are you at this morning? Be encouraged with what went on here yesterday. I want to leave that as the thought for today. Remember that, because that's how it's examples like that is how the gospel gets spread. That was more of a testimony than anything that Bob or I got up there and said yesterday. And I love Bob, by the way. That was the first time I'd ever gotten to meet Bob. I love Bob. Great guy. Whatever it is that you need this morning, I want to invite you to leave it at the altar. Whether you battle greed or whether you battle pursuing worldly things, whatever it is, leave it here at the altar this morning, because Jesus is the best destination for whatever you're struggling with. Leave it with him.